Jonathan Reed signed his name the way he signed most things now, clean, decisive, without hesitation. Jonathan A. Reed. The ink dried quickly on the thick, cream-colored paper, as if even the document was eager to be done with him. The conference room on the 32nd floor overlooked Midtown Manhattan, all glass and steel and muted winter light. Below, the city pulsed with pre-holiday urgency, taxis honking, pedestrians clutching shopping bags, office workers counting down the hours to escape. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against the ears. "That's it," his attorney said gently, sliding the papers into a leather folder. "You're officially divorced." Jonathan nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. 13 years reduced to a signature and a filing fee. He stood, straightened his tailored coat, and thanked the attorney out of habit. Muscle memory. The same reflex that had guided his marriage toward its quiet end: show up, perform, move forward. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. His reflection in the mirrored walls looked older than 42. The lines around his eyes were sharper, carved by late nights and unasked questions. He loosened his tie, then retightened it. Control mattered, especially now. Outside, the cold hit him like a reprimand. December in New York had no patience for sentimentality. He walked 3 blocks before realizing he had no destination. Claire would be expecting a text. She'd been waiting for this day, counting it like a finish line. "It's done," he typed. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Finally. He stared at the word. Finally. As if something had been resolved, not destroyed. Jonathan slipped the phone back into his pocket without replying and kept walking. Christmas lights blinked in storefront windows, artificial cheer spilling onto the sidewalks. Somewhere, a street musician played a slow, imperfect version of Silent Night. He remembered Emily humming that song while decorating the tree, Sophie perched on a stool beside her, handing over ornaments with solemn concentration. That was years ago. Before the silences grew longer than the conversations. Before work became an excuse instead of a responsibility. He told himself again that the affair hadn't caused the end. It had merely revealed it. That was the narrative he practiced. Claire had listened. Claire had laughed at his jokes, admired his ambition, touched his arm when he spoke as if he mattered. Emily had been tired, distant, busy with Sophie, with deadlines, with a life that no longer seemed to include him. Still, as Jonathan turned onto 6th Avenue, a familiar ache settled behind his ribs. He wondered briefly, unwillingly, what Emily was doing at that exact moment, whether she felt relief or devastation, whether she cried when she signed her name. The thought followed him into the evening, stubborn and unresolved, as snow began to fall, soft, relentless, and indifferent to the lines people drew between endings and beginnings. Claire Whitman had always believed in timing, in calendars and promotions, in the exact moment a market tipped or a person gave in. She believed life rewarded patience, and that if you waited long enough, played smart enough, you eventually got what you wanted. So when Jonathan walked into her apartment that night with the smell of cold air still clinging to his coat, divorce papers freshly signed, and Manhattan glittering behind him like a promise, Claire felt a quiet, triumphant calm settle into her bones. She didn't ask to see the papers. She didn't need proof. "You look lighter," she said, slipping her arms around his waist, her cheek resting against his chest, like something finally ended. Jonathan exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Yeah," he said, "it's done." She pulled back to look at him, her smile measured, not giddy, not cruel. Claire had learned that too much joy frightened men at the moment of victory. "Then tonight," she said softly, "we don't talk about lawyers or custody schedules or anything that came before me." Before me. The words landed with a subtle insistence. Her apartment was everything Emily's was not. Minimalist, deliberate, curated in shades of white and slate. No family photos, no clutter. Just clean lines, glass surfaces, and art that required explanation. Claire poured wine with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed this evening in her head a dozen times. They toasted. To new beginnings, she implied without saying it. Later, when they lay tangled in her sheets, Claire traced lazy circles on Jonathan's chest. Her touch was practiced, affectionate in a way that felt earned rather than assumed. She studied him, always studying. "So," she said casually, "Christmas is next week." Jonathan stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Yeah, you'll be with me, right?" she asked. Not a question, not quite a demand. He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "I need to see Sophie," he said, "at least for a little while. It's tradition." Claire's fingers paused. "Of course," she said quickly. Too quickly. "I wouldn't expect you to just erase her life." But something in her tone shifted, a hairline fracture easily missed. She rolled onto her side, propping her head on her hand. "I just don't want to feel like the secret anymore." "You're not," Jonathan said automatically. She raised an eyebrow. "Then why does it feel like I'm still waiting?" The question lingered between them, heavier than it deserved to be. Jonathan searched for the right answer and came up empty. He reached for her instead, pressing his lips to her shoulder, hoping touch could smooth over what words couldn't. It didn't. In the days that followed, Claire moved through his life with increasing visibility. Lunches at restaurants near the firm, a hand on his back when colleagues passed. Subtle, strategic. She never introduced herself as his girlfriend, but she didn't stop people from assuming. Jonathan watched it happen with a growing sense of unease. This was what he had wanted, wasn't it? To be chosen openly, to stop splitting himself into compartments, and yet something felt misaligned. Claire talked about the future in polished phrases. Trips they should take, neighborhoods they should consider, how nice it would be to host dinners now that things were simpler. She spoke as if the mess had been cleared away, as if nothing fragile remained. But Jonathan carried fragility with him everywhere. At night, when Claire slept curled confidently against his side, he found himself staring at the ceiling, thinking about Emily's quiet rituals, the way she lined up Sophie's shoes by the door, the way she folded laundry while listening to podcasts about people's messy lives. He missed the ordinariness of it, the sense of being known without performance. Once, over dinner, Claire laughed at something he said and added, "You're so much lighter now. I don't know how you stayed married for so long." Jonathan's fork froze midair. Emily wasn't... He stopped. He didn't know how to finish the sentence without defending a woman he had already betrayed. Claire noticed. She always noticed. "I just mean," she said smoothly, "you deserve someone who matches your pace." That night, after she fell asleep, Jonathan scrolled through his phone and found himself staring at an old photo Emily and Sophie in Central Park, leaves caught in their hair, both laughing at something just out of frame. He didn't remember taking it. He remembered the moment. Belonging, he realized, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It accumulated quietly over years of shared silences and small compromises. Desire, on the other hand, burned fast, bright, demanding. The cracks were small, almost invisible. A pause before he answered Claire's texts. A growing irritation at her certainty. A dull ache when he imagined Christmas morning somewhere else, in a house that no longer felt like his, but still claimed him. Claire sensed the shift before he did. "You're pulling away," she said one evening, not accusing, just observant. "I'm just tired," Jonathan replied. She studied him for a long moment. "Don't make me the consolation prize," she said quietly. The words unsettled him because he had no immediate reassurance to offer. Outside, the city continued its relentless countdown to Christmas, lights blinking, music swelling, as if insisting on joy. Inside Jonathan, something colder took root. The understanding that winning something did not guarantee it would feel like home. And for the first time since he'd signed his name away, he wondered whether the end he'd chosen was only the beginning of a different kind of loss. Emily Reed packed the house the way she had lived in it for years, methodically, without spectacle, her emotions folded neatly between practical decisions. She labeled boxes in careful handwriting. Books, winter coats, Sophie's things. She avoided words like memories or Jonathan. Some things did not need names. The house in Larchmont was too big for her now, It echoed in the mornings after Sophie left for school, the silence stretching from room to room like a held breath. Emily filled it with small sounds, running the dishwasher half full, turning on the radio for company, humming without realizing she was doing it. People had started to find out. Not in dramatic confrontations or whispered accusations, but in that subtle suburban way, longer looks at the grocery store, a pause before the PTA chairwoman said, "So, how are things?" Friends offered sympathy packaged as curiosity. Neighbors offered advice she hadn't asked for. "He left? You're so calm." I could never forgive that. Emily nodded, smiled when appropriate, and said very little. Silence had become her safest posture. Words, she'd learned, invited interpretation and judgment. At night, after Sophie was asleep, Emily allowed herself small, private rituals of grief. She sat on the edge of the bed and folded Jonathan's old sweaters, deciding which to keep for Sophie and which to donate. She reread emails from years ago, not love letters, just logistical notes, affectionate in their ordinariness. "Can you grab milk? Running late. Love you. Love you." 2 words that had survived longer than the marriage itself. Her mother called every other day from Connecticut, her concern wrapped tightly in pragmatism. "You'll be fine," she insisted. "You're strong. You always were." Emily pressed the phone between her shoulder and ear while scrubbing the kitchen sink. I know. Strength, she thought, was often confused with endurance. No one asked whether she was tired of enduring. The hardest moments came unexpectedly, at the dry cleaners when she realized she no longer needed to pick up Jonathan's suits, at the pharmacy when she automatically reached for his brand of cough drops. Once, while clearing out the hall closet, she found a scarf he'd given her, their first Christmas together. Cashmere, navy blue, soft from years of wear. She buried her face in it and breathed in, catching a ghost of his cologne. She did not cry. Crying felt too public, even when no one was watching. Sophie noticed more than Emily wanted to admit. Children always did. "Are you and Daddy mad at each other forever?" Sophie asked one evening, swinging her legs from the kitchen stool. Emily turned from the stove and crouched to meet her daughter's eyes. "No, sweetheart, we're just changing." Sophie frowned. "Like when you reorganized my room?" Emily smiled, the comparison almost painful in its innocence. "A little like that. But you didn't throw anything away," Sophie said. Emily's throat tightened. "Some things stay," she said carefully. "They just look different." Later that night, Emily sat at her desk and opened her laptop, staring at a half-finished article she'd been avoiding for weeks. Freelance work had slowed since the separation, not because she couldn't write, but because her voice felt distant to her, like it belonged to someone else. She forced herself to type. One sentence, then another. The rhythm returned slowly, like muscle memory. Writing, unlike marriage, still responded when she showed up. Occasionally she imagined what people assumed about her, that she'd been naive, that she'd missed the signs, that she'd let herself become invisible. The truth was messier. She had seen Jonathan drifting long before Claire ever existed. She had felt the shift in their conversations, the way his attention skimmed the surface of her words. She had tried subtly at first, then more directly to pull him back. Date nights, therapy suggestions, questions he answered with distraction. When the affair came to light, it hadn't shocked her. It had clarified something she'd been carrying alone. What surprised her was the depth of the grief. Not rage, not humiliation. Grief for a future she'd assumed was stable. For a version of herself who believed patience was enough. Emily signed the divorce papers at the kitchen table, Sophie coloring beside her. Her hand did not shake. She refused to let it. Later, alone, she sat in the dark living room and allowed herself one honest thought. I loved him well. That would have to be enough. The day before Christmas Eve, Emily finished packing the last box. She taped it shut and wrote bedroom on the side, then crossed it out and replaced it with new place. The apartment in White Plains wasn't ready yet, but naming it felt like progress. She walked through the house one final time, touching walls, door frames, the banister Jonathan had once fixed with unnecessary precision. She paused by the front window, watching snow begin to fall, soft and unassuming. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jonathan, brief and awkward. I might need to stop by tomorrow. Roads look bad. Let me know if that's okay. Emily stared at the screen longer than necessary. She could say no. She had every right to protect her boundaries. Instead, she typed, For Sophie, just for the night. She set the phone down and felt something settle into place. Not hope, not fear, but resolve. Silence, she knew now, was not emptiness. It was space. And space, if guarded carefully, could become armor. She turned off the lights and went upstairs, carrying herself forward with quiet dignity into a future that did not need to announce itself to be real. The snowstorm arrived earlier than predicted, thick and insistent, swallowing the highway mile by mile. Jonathan gripped the steering wheel as visibility dropped to almost nothing, the GPS rerouting him again and again as if confused by his intentions. White Plains was still 20 minutes away. Larchmont was 10. He told himself the decision was logistical. Sophie was expecting him. The roads were worsening. The house was there. Still, when he pulled into the familiar driveway, tires crunching against fresh snow, his chest tightened in a way no traffic delay ever had. The house glowed softly against the dark, warm yellow light spilling from the living room windows, wreaths still hanging crookedly on the front door. Emily had always insisted Christmas Eve should feel gentle. No flashing lights, no excess. Just enough to remind you where you were. Jonathan sat in the car longer than necessary, engine running, snow dusting the windshield like a quiet reprimand. He texted Claire, "Storm's bad, I'm staying here tonight," for Sophie. The reply came slower than usual. "Okay." Just that. No emoji, no reassurance. He pocketed the phone and stepped out into the cold. Emily opened the door before he knocked. She looked startled for half a second, just long enough to register, then composed herself. She wore a gray sweater he recognized, hair pulled back loosely, a trace of flour on her sleeve. "You made it," she said. "Barely," Jonathan replied. "The roads?" "I know." She stepped aside. "Come in." The warmth hit him immediately. The smell, too. Something baked. Cinnamon and butter. Home, his mind supplied automatically before he could stop it. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes lighting up. "Daddy!" Jonathan dropped his bag and caught her as she barreled into him, arms tight around his neck. "Hey, bug," he said into her hair. "Merry Christmas Eve." Emily watched them from a careful distance, hands folded, her expression unreadable. Dinner was simple. Soup and bread, the kind of meal that didn't ask questions. They sat at the kitchen table like polite guests in a reenactment of their old life, conversation orbiting Sophie's school play, the storm, a neighbor's fallen tree. Jonathan noticed everything. The way Emily no longer reached for him unconsciously, the absence of his mug on the counter, the way Sophie glanced between them, alert but hopeful. After dinner, they decorated cookies. Emily and Sophie worked at one end of the counter, frosting carefully applied. Jonathan pretended expertise he didn't have, earning Sophie's laughter when his snowman collapsed. For a moment, just a moment, it felt dangerously close to normal. Later, when Sophie was tucked into bed, Emily lingered in the doorway, brushing hair from her daughter's face. Jonathan watched from the hall, an ache blooming behind his ribs. "Will you be here in the morning?" Sophie asked sleepily. Jonathan hesitated. Emily's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Yes," he said finally, "I will." Sophie smiled, reassured, and drifted off. Downstairs, the house seemed to exhale. Emily poured tea and handed him a mug without comment. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the Christmas tree lights blinking softly between them. Outside, the storm howled, sealing them in. "This wasn't the plan," Jonathan said quietly. "No," Emily agreed, "but plans change." Silence stretched. Not hostile, just full. "You can take the guest room," she added. "Sheets are clean." "Emily," he began, then stopped. He didn't know what he was asking for. She met his gaze steadily. "We can be kind tonight," she said. "That's all." Later, long after Emily had gone upstairs, Jonathan stood alone in the living room. The ornaments told a story, paper stars Sophie had made, photos slipped into frames over the years, evidence of continuity he'd underestimated. He found himself holding an ornament Emily had bought on their honeymoon, glass worn thin with age. His reflection warped in its surface. Upstairs, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She listened to the house settle, to footsteps pause and then retreat. Her body remembered him too well, his rhythms, his silences. She pressed a hand to her chest and breathed. This was temporary, she told herself. Just a night. Yet something about the proximity unsettled her. Not because it tempted her, but because it reminded her how easily she could have stayed, how much effort it had taken to leave. Downstairs, Jonathan sat on the edge of the guest bed, phone in hand. Claire's name hovered on the screen. He didn't open the message she'd eventually sent. He already knew what it would ask for. Instead, he listened to the storm and to the faint sounds of the house, Emily moving somewhere above him, Sophie turning in her sleep. Belonging, he realized, was not a place you could return to at will. It required permission. And forgiveness. And timing he no longer controlled. Christmas Eve pressed in around them, quiet and unavoidable, forcing 3 lives to share the same fragile space unfinished, unresolved, and suddenly too close to ignore. Morning arrived softly, as if the storm itself had decided not to intrude. Snow lay untouched on the lawn, smoothing the sharp edges of the world into something almost tender. The house felt suspended in time, neither past nor future, just a quiet pause. Jonathan woke before anyone else. For a moment, disorientation held him. The guest room was unfamiliar in a way that felt intentional. Neutral walls, no photos, no shared history. Then memory settled in, heavy and precise. Christmas morning, Emily, Sophie. The life he had stepped out of but never fully left. He dressed quietly and went downstairs. The tree lights were still on, their soft glow reflecting off the window glass. Beneath the tree, presents were arranged carefully, each labeled in Emily's neat handwriting. Jonathan recognized his name on one of them. The sight unsettled him more than it should have. He picked up an ornament that had fallen onto the rug sometime during the night. It was wooden, carved by Sophie in first grade, uneven and painted with too much gold. Daddy was written on the back in crooked letters. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Emily appeared, wrapped in a cardigan, hair loose around her shoulders. She stopped when she saw him holding the ornament. Something flickered across her face. Nostalgia, maybe, or resignation. Sophie made that when she was 6, she said quietly. She cried because the paint ran. Jonathan smiled faintly. You told her imperfections made it better. Emily shrugged. They usually do. They stood there, not quite looking at each other, sharing a memory that felt both intimate and forbidden. Sophie burst in moments later, pajama-clad and radiant. It's Christmas! The morning unfolded in careful choreography. Coffee brewed, wrapping paper tore. Sophie narrated every gift with solemn enthusiasm. Jonathan and Emily exchanged polite smiles, restrained comments. Outsiders performing familiarity for their daughter's sake. But the house betrayed them. Photos on the walls whispered their history. A framed picture of Jonathan and Emily at a friend's wedding, arms around each other, unguarded. Vacation shots from Cape Cod. Sophie as a baby, sleeping between them. Jonathan caught Emily watching him as he noticed these things. Her gaze was steady, observant, as if cataloging his reactions. Later, as Sophie assembled a complicated toy on the living room floor, Emily disappeared briefly and returned with an old photo album. I was organizing, she said. Found this. She set it on the table between them. Jonathan hesitated before opening it. Inside, their early years unfolded. Awkward smiles, cramped apartments, cheap wine, and expensive dreams. He lingered over a photo of Emily laughing, head thrown back, a version of her he hadn't seen in years. You used to take pictures of everything, he said. You used to ask me to stop, she replied. No bitterness, just fact. Sophie looked up. Why don't you live together anymore? The question landed without warning. Jonathan froze. Emily inhaled slowly, then knelt beside her daughter. Sometimes adults make choices, Emily said carefully. Not because they stop caring, but because they need to grow differently. Sophie considered this. Can you still grow in the same house? Emily and Jonathan exchanged a look. Too much passed between them to be named. Sometimes, Jonathan said, but not always. Sophie nodded, unsatisfied but accepting. Later, while Sophie napped on the couch, Emily began sorting through a box in the hall closet. Jonathan hovered nearby, unsure of his place. She pulled out an old scarf, navy blue, cashmere. You left this, she said, holding it out. Jonathan took it, fingers brushing hers. The contact sent a jolt through him, sharp and unexpected. I thought you donated it, he said. I almost did, she replied. Couldn't. The admission hung between them, fragile. They moved into the kitchen, conversation skimming safer ground, weather, logistics, the move. Yet beneath every word, tension coiled. You seem settled, Jonathan said finally. Emily looked at him then, really looked. I'm trying not to disappear, she said. There's a difference. He nodded, shame pressing in. I never wanted you to feel invisible. I know, she said. That doesn't change that I did. Silence followed, thick and charged. In the afternoon, Sophie insisted on showing Jonathan her room, still mostly intact, though some boxes waited in the corner. Childhood frozen mid-transition. Emily watched from the doorway as father and daughter laughed over a forgotten stuffed animal. Her chest ached, not with longing, but with the weight of holding two truths at once. This was love, and it was no longer enough. As daylight faded, snow began again, light and steady. The house glowed, a fragile island of warmth. Jonathan stood by the window, watching the flakes fall, memories crowding in uninvited. He felt the urge to speak, to confess, to undo. Emily joined him, careful not to touch. What scares me, she said quietly, is not losing what we were. It's forgetting why I needed to leave. Jonathan closed his eyes. The ghosts of their life together pressed close, beautiful, aching, unresolved. And in the space between them, something trembled. Memory sharpened into longing, politeness stretched to its breaking point, and love revealing itself not as comfort, but as the most dangerous reminder of all. Midnight arrived without ceremony. The house was dark except for the muted glow of the Christmas tree, its lights blinking in a slow, almost tired rhythm. Sophie slept upstairs, sprawled diagonally across her bed, dreams uninterrupted by adult fractures. Outside, the snow fell steadily, sealing the world into silence. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a mug that was already clean. The water ran longer than necessary. She welcomed the sound. It gave her hands something to do while her thoughts refused to stay still. Jonathan watched from the doorway. You don't have to keep cleaning, he said softly. Emily didn't turn around. I know. She shut off the faucet anyway and leaned her palms against the counter. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet felt heavier now, no longer polite, no longer protective. It pressed, demanded. This is the part, Jonathan said finally, where we pretend everything's fine until morning. Emily turned then. Her face was calm, but something in her eyes had hardened. I don't think I can do that anymore. He swallowed. Neither can I. They sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table, the same table where homework had been supervised and arguments postponed and meals eaten without attention. The past hovered close, but tonight it didn't soften the edges, it sharpened them. I was lonely, Jonathan said, the words leaving him before he could rehearse them. For a long time. Emily nodded once. I know. The lack of surprise unsettled him. You do? Yes. Her voice was steady. I felt it. You were there, but you weren't with me. And I was tired. Too tired of trying to pull you back without knowing what direction you'd gone. I didn't know how to say it, he said, that I felt replaceable. Like I only mattered when I provided something. Emily's hands tightened around her mug. And I felt like I only existed when something needed fixing. Sophie, the house, the schedule. You stopped asking how I was, Jonathan. He flinched. That's not true. She held his gaze. When was the last time you asked and waited for the answer? The question dismantled something in him. Control, maybe. The illusion that he had been managing the damage instead of avoiding it. And Claire? Emily asked quietly. The name settled between them like a weight. Jonathan exhaled slowly. She made me feel seen. Emily's mouth curved into something that wasn't a smile. I know. That, too, surprised him. I saw it in your face before I saw it in your phone, she continued. The way you started coming home charged, restless, like you'd touched something alive and couldn't put it down. I never meant to hurt you. I believe that, Emily said, but intention doesn't change impact. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. I told myself it was already over, that I wasn't destroying anything, just leaving something broken. And that helped? She asked. No, he admitted. It just made me reckless. Emily looked down at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. What hurt the most wasn't that you wanted someone else. It was that you stopped fighting for us before I knew we were in danger. Jonathan felt the words land, heavy and precise. He'd imagined anger, accusations, tears, not this calm dissection of loss. I hated you for a while, Emily continued. Not loudly, just enough to scare myself. I resented how easy it seemed for you to escape, how everyone assumed I'd be fine. I wasn't escaping, he said. I was unraveling. She met his eyes. So was I. Alone. The confession stripped something bare between them. There was no winning this conversation, no version where he emerged intact. I signed the papers because I needed the noise to stop, Emily said. I needed proof that I could survive without waiting for you to come back to yourself. Jonathan's chest tightened. And now? Now, she said slowly, I'm learning that survival isn't the same as healing. Silence returned, different this time. Not defensive, not restrained. Honest. I don't know how to fix this, Jonathan said. Emily shook her head. I don't think it's something to fix. I think it's something to understand and then let change us. He closed his eyes, the truth cutting deeper than accusation ever could. The illusion that he could control the ending, that by signing papers, choosing Claire, managing appearances, he could avoid consequence, collapsed completely. Upstairs, the house creaked softly, as if listening. Emily stood. We should stop, she said gently, before we turn honesty into hope. Jonathan looked up at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. Emily, she held up a hand. Tonight was necessary, she said. That doesn't mean it gets to rewrite everything. She walked toward the stairs, then paused. But thank you, she added without turning back, for finally telling the truth. Jonathan remained at the table long after she was gone, the echoes of their confessions settling into him. For the first time, there was no narrative to hide behind, no villain, no rescue, no clean exit. Just two people who had loved imperfectly, and a reckoning that arrived far too late to be painless. Midnight passed, and with it the last illusion of control. Christmas morning arrived, pale and quiet, as if the night had wrung all excess from the world. Jonathan woke to the sound of movement upstairs, Sophie's footsteps, light and eager, followed by Emily's softer pace. For a moment, he lay still, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, the weight of the night pressing gently but insistently against his chest. Nothing had been resolved, and yet everything felt exposed. Downstairs, the smell of coffee drifted through the house. Jonathan joined them a few minutes later, uncertain of his place, uncertain of everything. Sophie sat cross-legged in front of the tree, already tearing into wrapping paper with joyful urgency. "You're late," she announced, smiling wide. "Couldn't miss this," Jonathan said, lowering himself onto the rug. Emily handed him a mug without meeting his eyes. The gesture was automatic, unceremonious, and deeply intimate. The morning unfolded carefully. Sophie's laughter filled the room, bright and uncomplicated. Jonathan and Emily hovered at the edges of it, orbiting the same center without colliding. They spoke when necessary, smiled when appropriate, avoided the gravity of what had been said hours earlier. Jonathan watched Emily closely. There was a stillness to her now, not resignation, but composure. She moved with intention, as if each step was a choice she had already made. After breakfast, Sophie disappeared upstairs to test out a new game. The house fell into a tentative quiet. Jonathan stood by the window, hands in his pockets. Outside, the snow reflected light like a blank page. "I should go soon," he said. Emily nodded. "The roads will clear by noon." There it was, the obvious ending, the sensible one. "I don't want to leave things the way they were," he added. Emily leaned against the counter, studying him. They won't be, she said. They can't be. He took a breath. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just need to know if there's any room left for us to figure out what comes next. Emily's gaze softened, but her voice did not. Clarity isn't the same as permission, Jonathan. He absorbed that. And Claire? The question surprised him, but he didn't deflect it. I can't pretend last night didn't change me, he said. But I also can't undo what I chose. Emily nodded slowly. That's the part people don't like, she said. Living with more than one truth. She walked to the hallway and picked up her coat, slipping it on with quiet resolve. I'm taking Sophie sledding with my sister this afternoon. Can I see her before you go? Jonathan asked. Of course. Sophie reappeared moments later, bundled and glowing. Jonathan knelt to zip her jacket, hands steady despite everything. Are you coming with us? Sophie asked. Jonathan glanced at Emily. She shook her head gently, not unkindly. Not today, he said, but soon. Sophie accepted this, satisfied with the promise of soon. At the door, Emily paused. Last night mattered, she said, but it doesn't decide everything. He met her eyes. Neither does fear, he replied. She considered that. No, she agreed. But it does deserve honesty. They stood there, suspended between past and future, knowing that love, real love, did not guarantee reunion. Only responsibility. As Emily and Sophie stepped into the snow, Jonathan watched them go. The house emptied around him, familiar and suddenly foreign. He took out his phone. Claire had called twice, left one message. I need to know where I stand. Jonathan closed his eyes. Choices, he realized, didn't come with certainty, only consequences, and the courage to accept them. Christmas morning faded into afternoon, leaving behind something quieter than hope, but stronger than regret. A clarity that asked him to grow up finally and choose not what felt good, but what was true. He picked up his coat. The door closed behind him, softly, as the snow continued to fall. The city resumed its rhythm the day after Christmas, indifferent to personal reckonings. Jonathan returned to his apartment that evening and stood in the doorway longer than necessary. The space felt staged, now too clean, too intentional, as if designed for a life he hadn't finished becoming. Claire's scarf lay draped over a chair. A wine glass sat rinsed and drying by the sink, evidence of a relationship that had assumed continuity. He sat, finally, and listened to the quiet. Not the peaceful kind. This was the quiet that asked questions. Claire arrived later than usual. She didn't kiss him hello. I saw the weather report, she said, setting her bag down. You were snowed in. Yes, with them, she added. Jonathan nodded. There was no use pretending otherwise. She crossed her arms, studying his face the way she always had, analytical, perceptive. Something changed, she said. Not an accusation, an observation. Yes, he said again. Claire exhaled slowly. I waited a long time for you to be free. I know. And now? Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. Are you? Jonathan thought of Emily's words, living with more than one truth. I'm responsible for what I broke, he said, and for what I build next. I can't keep asking you to live in the aftermath of a marriage you didn't create. Silence followed. Then Claire nodded once, sharp and contained. I didn't want to be the lesson, she said quietly. I wanted to be the future. I'm sorry, he replied. And for the first time, it wasn't a plea, just fact. She gathered her things without drama. At the door, she paused. You'll miss what we were, she said, eventually. I already do, Jonathan answered. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt less crowded and lonelier. The consequence, he realized, of clarity. Emily unpacked slowly in the White Plains apartment, letting the rooms introduce themselves to her. Smaller, brighter, honest about its limits. Sophie explored enthusiastically, claiming corners and windows as if mapping a new country. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, Emily sat on the floor among half-open boxes and allowed herself to breathe. No performance, no armor, just the steady awareness of being here. Jonathan called 2 days later. I wanted to check in, he said. No agenda. Emily appreciated that more than he knew. We're settling, she replied. Sophie likes the light. I'm glad. A pause. Then I ended things with Claire. Emily closed her eyes, not in relief, not in triumph, just acknowledgement. That was your choice, she said carefully, not mine. I know. Another pause, gentler this time. I'm starting therapy, he added, individually, and I want to be better. Not for a second chance, just better. Emily smiled faintly. Growth, she'd learned, didn't need an audience. I hope you are, she said, for Sophie, and for yourself. They hung up without promises. It felt right. Weeks passed. Winter softened into something manageable. Jonathan learned the discipline of showing up without expectation. School pickups, scheduled dinners, conversations that didn't search for hidden meanings. He learned to listen, to stay when things were uncomfortable, to accept boundaries without trying to negotiate them away. Emily watched from a careful distance. Trust did not rush back. It didn't owe anyone speed. One evening, after Sophie fell asleep on the couch mid-movie, Emily and Jonathan sat quietly, the television forgotten. You're different, Emily said. So are you. She nodded. I don't miss who we were, she admitted. I miss what we almost learned too late. Jonathan looked at her. Really looked. Do you think forgiveness means going back? Emily considered the question. No, she said. I think forgiveness means not needing the past to punish the present. He absorbed that, the truth of it settling deep. Spring came. Emily took on more work, her writing sharpened by experience rather than bitterness. She rediscovered parts of herself she'd stored away. Opinions, desires, ambition. Independence didn't harden her, it clarified her. Jonathan learned to live alone without calling it temporary. He built a life that didn't depend on absolution. Some nights were lonely, others were peaceful. Both felt earned. They never named what they were becoming. That was part of the honesty. On Sophie's birthday, months later, they stood together watching her blow out candles, joy uncomplicated and fierce. Make a wish, Emily whispered. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut. Jonathan caught Emily's gaze across the table. There was affection there, respect, a shared history that no longer demanded repair, only care. Love, Emily realized, had not vanished. It had changed form, shed illusion, learned restraint. What remained was quieter than romance, but stronger than regret. It was responsibility. It was growth. It was the courage to move forward without rewriting the truth. And for the first time, that was enough.